Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Have you ever wondered what actually runs the world? I mean, not the politicians, not the tech giants, but the invisible, underlying code that dictates human behavior and processes the reality around us. Well, today, we are definitely not looking at economics as some dry, dusty academic subject. No way! We're going to treat it as the ultimate source code, the fundamental algorithm of human decision-making. We're going to decode the 10 principles of economics, extracting them straight from the foundational texts to see exactly how this global operating system actually works. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really make sense of this system, we need to break it down across three logical scales. First, how we make decisions. Next, how we interact. And finally, the macroeconomic machine.
Let's start with Section 1, how we make decisions. Basically, the individual node. Principle number 1 is an absolute reality check. People face trade-offs. You see, our system has limited processing power, what economists call scarcity. And because resources are inherently limited, choosing to execute one action means you absolutely cannot execute another. Society constantly has to toggle between choices. A classic historical example is the trade-off between guns and butter. The more a society spends on national defense, the guns, to protect its shores, the less it can spend on consumer goods, the butter, to raise the standard of living at home. We see this today with the environment too, right? Regulations that require a cleaner environment are fantastic, but they raise the cost of producing goods, which means a direct trade-off with higher incomes or corporate profits. There are literally no free updates in this system. That brings us to principle number 2. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. This is your opportunity cost. Let's imagine a scenario comparing Frank the farmer and Ruby the rancher. If Frank wants to produce just 1 single ounce of meat, his system requires him to sacrifice 4 ounces of potatoes. That is his true cost. We actually make these calculations subconsciously all the time. Think about star college athletes. They calculate their opportunity cost perfectly when they decide to drop out of school. The millions they can earn playing professional sports immediately makes the opportunity cost of sitting in a college classroom way too high. The cost of a choice isn't just the money you spend, it's the invisible ghost of the alternative you killed to make it. So let's apply this to a real-world puzzle for Principle 3. Here's the scenario. An airline has empty seats on a flight that's just about to take off. A standby passenger at the gate is only willing to pay $300 for a seat. Should the airline sell that ticket? Let's quickly crunch the baseline data here. It costs the airline $100,000 to fly this 200-seat plane. If you do the simple math, the average cost of flying each seat is $500. So looking at this baseline, you might think it's a terrible business move to sell a ticket for $300. Why on earth would an airline ever rationally accept less money than the average cost of the seat? Well, the answer is Principle 3. Rational people think at the margin. A marginal change is just a small, incremental adjustment to an existing plan, actions taken at the absolute edge. Since the plane is already flying anyway, the marginal cost of adding 1 extra passenger is practically zero. It's maybe just the cost of a can of soda they drink on the flight. As long as that standby passenger pays more than the cost of that soda, that $300 ticket is pure profit. Rational decisions aren't made by looking at the whole past. They're made right at the margin. And our final individual rule is Principle 4. People respond to incentives. Since we make decisions by weighing costs and benefits, any change to those variables alters our behavior. Take the famous Peltzman seatbelt study. When auto safety laws required seatbelts, the intent was obvious: safer driving and fewer deaths. But by making it safer to survive a crash, the law inadvertently lowered the cost of driving recklessly. The unexpected outcome? People responded to this no incentive by driving faster and less carefully. Driver deaths stayed roughly the same, but pedestrian deaths actually increased. It proves that if you change the incentives, you literally reprogram the behavioral algorithm. So, to quickly recap the individual node, you face trade-offs. Your true cost is what you sacrifice, you think at the margin, and your behavior is fundamentally driven by incentives. Let's move on and see how this builds as we upgrade our view. Section 2. How we interact. The network effect. Principle 5 tells us that trade can make everyone better off. Imagine if your family completely isolated itself from the rest of the network. You would absolutely crash. You'd have to grow your own food, sew your own clothes, and build your own house completely from scratch. It would be incredibly inefficient. Trade allows nodes, whether they're individual families or entire nations, to specialize in the specific activities they do best. By specializing and then trading on the network, everyone gets access to a much greater variety of goods and services at a much lower cost.
And this naturally leads us to Principle 6. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Think about a bustling historical market scene. It might look completely chaotic on the surface, but it's actually a highly sophisticated, decentralized computing network. There's no central planner telling the baker how much bread to bake or the farmer what to charge. Instead, as the famous economist Adam Smith noted, all these participants are guided by an invisible hand. They interact in the market looking out for their own well-being, but prices adjust dynamically to guide these self-interested nodes into outcomes that maximize the well-being of society as a whole. A historical market is running the exact same invisible hand algorithm as a modern tech network like Uber, dynamically matching supply and demand through price. But, the code isn't always perfect. Principle 7 acknowledges that governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. Why? Because sometimes the invisible hand algorithm experiences a market failure. This usually happens for two main reasons: an externality, like a factory polluting the air and impacting bystanders who aren't even in the market, or market power, where a single node, like a monopoly, gains way too much control over pricing. When the market fails to allocate resources efficiently on its own, you need a government patch. That means intervention through public policy to enforce property rights, regulate monopolies, or tax pollution, ultimately restoring efficiency to the network. All right, zooming all the way out now. Section 3, the macroeconomic machine, the system mainframe.
Principle 8 states that a country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services. It's honestly that simple. The ultimate metric of a nation's wealth isn't how much gold it has buried in a vault or how much money is sitting in a bank. It's purely derived from its productivity output. In nations where workers can produce a large quantity of goods and services per hour, most people enjoy a high standard of living. Where productivity is low, the standard of living is low. To boost living standards, policymakers have to upgrade the system's processing power, ensuring workers are well-educated, have the right tools, and have access to the absolute best technology.
Principle 9 addresses a critical, system-wide bug: inflation. Prices rise when the government prints too much money. When policymakers flood the mainframe with excess currency, the overall value of that currency drops. It's just basic supply and demand applied to money itself. If the government creates huge quantities of the nation's money, the value of that money falls, meaning it's going to take a lot more of those dollars to buy the exact same goods.
And that leads us to our final rule, Principle 10. Society faces a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. This is the ultimate balancing act for the macro machine. When the government increases the amount of money in the economy, it stimulates spending and demand, which encourages firms to hire more workers, so unemployment goes down. But as we literally just learned, that same flood of money eventually causes prices to rise, meaning inflation goes up. Tweaking the system to suppress inflation often temporarily spikes unemployment, and trying to fix unemployment can easily trigger inflation. It's a constant, delicate calibration.
So the crucial point here is this: economics is not just a list of random, disconnected theories. It is a unified, highly integrated operating system. From the individual node agonizing over the opportunity cost of a decision, to the invisible hand seamlessly organizing millions of trades, all the way up to the massive macroeconomic mainframe balancing inflation and unemployment, these 10 principles flawlessly integrate to form the reality of our global economy. Now that you've seen behind the curtain in this explainer, you really can't unsee it. These 10 principles are actively running in the background right now. They're in every choice you make, every single purchase you tap your card for, and every headline you read. So I'll leave you with this. Now that you possess the source code, how will you decode the economic matrix operating all around you today? Stay focused, keep learning, and start seeing the hidden architecture of your world.